So the sort of final question that I wanted to kind of really land on with the dialogues concerning natural religion is something that we've spoken about, I think, either on Twitter or in email before, just in passing. You were kind of saying that, when you look at kind of the most well-known theologians today, looking at something like Alvin Plantinga, for instance, a very well-known, very well-respected um, philosopher of religion. You're kind of you said in passing, Ben, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. So if I'm wrong here, please tell me. But that they don't touch some of the items within the dialogue concerning natural religion, because the dialogues concerning natural religion seem to have almost splintered various elements of the philosophy of religion that people are not scared to come to, but don't know how to navigate now. Would you mind kind of just picking up that sort of thread and just hammering that home for us?
Yeah, so Alfred North Whitehead had a very famous quote where he said that all of Western philosophy is but a footnote to Plato. And so what he's getting at in that quip is that Plato's work has been so influential that really what contemporary philosophy consists of is responding to the various questions that Plato asked, posed to us, and the solutions in which, or the answers that we give to those questions. And I think there's a very similar analogy that can be made with David Hume and the philosophy of religion, in the sense that most of philosophy of religion nowadays is still a response to David Hume's work. The very, why do we discuss, design arguments, cosmological arguments, ontological arguments, and the problem of evil? Why are those, why is that the way everything is divided up? We see that in Hume's dialogues. Why do we see these sort of splintered views of the evidentialists and then the non-evidentialists? So the evidentialists are the natural theologians like Cleanthes, trying to find a rational foundation for religion within something like science. So, the modern figure today would be Richard Swinburne. But there's another approach that says that we shouldn't know that evidential approach is a dead end. This is very much what Demea says of Cleanthes in the dialogues. And so someone like Demea would be like Alvin Plantinga today in his Reformed epistemology. This idea that, look, we can have a knowledge of God beyond, that's not dependent on evidence. Our knowledge of God can be what he says is properly basic. We have this properly functioning sensus divinitatis, and this sensus divinitatis is a faculty of our minds that brings us into direct contact with the divine. And so that we can just have this non-inferential knowledge of God. And so this kind of goes around the natural theologian and concedes, look, the project of natural theology does not succeed. So we don't want to put our religious faith on evidential grounds. We want to put them on something else, something that's not merely a relation of ideas or a matter of fact. And so I think those two warring camps are just a continuation of Hume pitting Demea and Cleanthes against one another. Another way in which you see this is, Cleanthes has an anthropomorphic model of God. God resembles our minds. Divine intelligence is like human intelligence. It has thoughts and beliefs and desires and intentions, and its mind is demarcated by time. He has thoughts at this time and different thoughts at another time. And so that this is, the anthropomorphic model of God. Whereas Demea has more of the classical theist model of God, where God's nature is incomprehensible. God is not a being among beings, he is being itself. He is wholly simple and totally immutable. So the first model, the anthropomorphic model, we're worried about anthropomorphism. We're worried about making ourselves the model of the universe. We're thinking, it seems idolatrous to make ourselves the model of the universe. And so this is exactly what a lot of Catholics will say to Protestants. They will say, look, you've anthropomorphized God. You've taken the mysteriousness and the awe out of God in a very important way, and you've just made him, kind of like Zeus on Mount Olympus. Just only further, instead of on Mount Olympus, you just put him beyond space and time. And you get this, kind of anthropomorphic God in the clouds with a beard, picture of God. But that Catholic model, the mystic, Thomistic model of total immutability and total simplicity, it's really hard to make sense of a mind. Like if we're saying that God's act is just one single simple act with no distinction in it, well, then we have to say that God has no thoughts, no will, no reason, and in a word, is no mind at all. And so you have these two warring models, what's often called theistic personalism, and then classical theism. And so these are just a continuation of Cleanthes and Demea's, war between these two models, between two theists in Hume's dialogues. Why is the problem of evil so important? Well, because Hume lays out, he's like, look, the Epicurus' logical problem of evil is still a problem. Also, if you think that you can solve that problem by making God finite, well, then we've got this other evidential problem of evil too. That's why we talk about the logical and the, that's why he even makes that distinction between a logical and an evidential problem of evil. And he just gives, they even have a name these days. They're called Humean arguments from evil. They're essentially abductive arguments from evil. That's Hume's influence. Not necessarily in the dialogues, but in the inquiry, there's of miracles. And so obviously the entire, if anyone familiar with the resurrection of Jesus and the literature that surrounds that, Hume's influence on miracles there is huge. You have to say something to Hume. If you're going to say that it's rational to believe in a miracle, you're not going to be able to say that in a philosophical setting without saying something about Hume. So to my mind, those influences from Hume's really just devastating critiques of the design argument, the two models of God that Hume puts on the table. I would also argue his critiques of the cosmological argument also hold up. Those are considered the weakest part of the dialogues. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's generally how it's seen. And then obviously his work on the problem of evil. And so it's really hard to look at contemporary philosophy of religion and not see Hume's influence in it. When you read through all the big, influential, important papers and books that have been written over the past 50 years in philosophy of religion, you find a lot of Hume cited in that. You find a lot of Hume and Kant being responded to, because it's really difficult to overemphasize just how much of an influence their work has had on how we think about these questions and how we're going to keep thinking about these. And by the way, so Hume's dialogues are modeled after Cicero's on the nature of the gods, on the nature of the god. In that it's a dialogue where different characters are pit, and so really you can see Hume as continuing that tradition, and Hume's, for the foreseeable future, will still be considered an introductory text of, hey, if you want to think about religion seriously, read Hume's dialogues. Start there. And that's one of just the best places you can start.
Yeah, I remember kind of chatting with you about dialogues concerning natural religion and asking you kind of, what should I read beforehand? What should I do? X, Y, Z? And you were saying, no, actually just read it. Like, sure, have secondary sources that go into each section and give you a bit more of a breakdown. That's absolutely fine. But it is possible to pick up the dialogues concerning natural religion, read it from start to finish, and learn things and come away from it being enriched. Sure, you're not going to get everything. It's a very, very comprehensive, deep text, but it's still readable. There's still stuff you pick up from it. And as you said, you
there are
read
a
it
few
multiple
barriers
times.
here and there, but they're few and far between. So, and by barriers, I mean, so he uses the word vulgar. So that doesn't necessarily, like, when we hear the word vulgar, we think of like a curse word or something. And so what he means by vulgar is common. So if he says vulgar experience, he means common experience. If he says vulgar people, he just means common people. And so it's not supposed to have this negative, pejorative sense to it. So as long as you are aware that that's just how this language was used back then, those barriers are very, very small. You're very right in that it's very accessible. You can pick it up and you can just start reading it, and really the ideas will be clear. If you have familiarity with philosophy, it'll be one of the easiest things you've ever read. Even if you're not familiar with philosophy, it's a great way to start familiarizing yourself with philosophy. Really working over it over and over again. An audiobook is excellent in this regard because it's usually a British narrator who has really worked out the inflections and the prose that Hume is, because the punctuation feels very sporadic, but it's there because Hume expects it to be read in a certain way, and an audiobook narrator will read it to you in that way, and you'll go, wow, this is just incredibly well written. And again, the originality is obviously the clarity. The clarity is something that always strikes me every time I go back and read Hume. I just finished a reread of an Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, and I've read that a dozen times at least. But every time I read, I'm like, God, this is just so clear. Like I understand. Like I don't have answers, I don't have solutions, but the problems are very, very clear.
If you enjoyed this clip, then head on over to Locals to access the full conversation right now. Supporters can access the video version, and everyone can access the audio-only version of the conversation. I'll see you over there.